This video is sponsored by Squarespace. As you can tell by my voice, I am American, and I am not British. But as a kid, I ended up watching and reading a bunch of British media. Some of it I think was just generally popular in America, but some things I feel like I'm the only American who knows about it. Specifically, the series Brambly Hedge. Brambly Hedge started as a picture book series by Jill Barklem. The first books were published in 1980 and are about a community of mice living in a place called Brambly Hedge. And over the years, the brand has expanded to include an animated series and all kinds of merchandise. Now, the information I could find about the creator, Jill Barklem, was a little bit limited. There's not a ton of articles and basically no interviews, or at least not ones that have been digitized. I'm sure if you were in England at a place with an archive of physical newspapers, you could find something, but that option is not available to me. So a lot of the information I used is from the official Brambly Hedge website. And hey, if you want a website, you can manage it with the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. Squarespace allows you to build a beautiful website with no coding required. No coding required, best 3 words in the English language. You can make a portfolio, blog, or even an online store. They have fully customizable templates. All you need to do is drag and drop elements onto your site. They have tons of design tools available. You can choose a custom color palette, Google and Typekit fonts, and different post types. Let's say you're running a brand about a community of mice. Well, you can sell products right on your website. You can sort products into categories, create discounts, manage inventory and orders, even let customers create an account to save their checkout info. If you want to post updates about your society of mice, Squarespace lets you create an email mailing list and share blog posts. If any of that sounds interesting to you, go to squarespace.com for a free trial, play around a little bit, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/sarahserif to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. This hat is already getting itchy. Okay. Jill Barklem was born in 1951 in Epping, Essex. She lived near Epping Forest, which served as an inspiration for the location of Brambly Hedge. Jill's parents were John and Ivy Gaze. Jill's father came from a long line of drapers, like draping fabric, like sewing, and he owned a department store called Pine's Stores on Epping High Street. When Jill was 13, she suffered a detached retina. So, according to one of my favorite websites, the Mayo Clinic, the retina is the back part of the eye. So like the dark side of the moon, it's the side of the eye you don't see. And the eyeball can kind of lift off of where it's supposed to be. This separates the retinal cells from the layer of blood vessels that provides oxygen and nourishment to the eye. The longer retinal detachment goes without treatment, the greater the risk of permanent vision loss in the affected eye. This condition is, I guess, painless. I think you don't have like sensory nerves there, maybe. But the symptoms include all sorts of weird vision loss problems. So while Jill Barklem was recovering, she couldn't take part in sports, or I guess if you're British, sport. So she would stay in the library and either read or work on art. She specifically loved drawing plants, a passion that would follow her into adulthood. Out of school, she decided to study illustration at St. Martin's School of Art in London. She said, "I did not have a very clear idea of my future, but assumed I would earn my living by illustrating other people's books. I certainly never imagined that one day I would write my own." Which after university, she wrote a couple picture books for Lion Publishing and also contributed illustrations to some of their religious books. So she did work on other people's books a little bit, but her main passion project would turn into Brambly Hedge. When she was in university, she would take the London Underground to school. She traveled to school on the Central Line from Epping, if that means anything to you. And while she was dealing with this urban hustle and bustle, she would distract herself by imagining a community of mice. She started working on this project and did what I would call a meticulous amount of research. She spent 5 years creating and researching the Brambly Hedge world. Also somewhere in there, she married her husband David, who is an antiques dealer. Here are some examples of the research she did. Many of the trees in Brambly Hedge are inspired by actual trees in Epping Forest. All of the plants that she drew were botanically correct, and she would do studies of the plants. She made sure that every recipe for the food that the mice ate could actually be made from foraged ingredients, so she would cook the recipes herself. And all of the machinery in the mouse mill and dairy were tested by Jill in working miniature models. It's a level of commitment to the bit that I very much respect. But even though she had created this rich world, publishers weren't into it because she didn't have, a story. Unfortunately, a necessary component for a picture book. Jill had sent an unsolicited submission to William Collins, later a part of HarperCollins. And I guess she called them to follow up, hey, have you checked my submission? And then after that phone call, the then commissioning editor of children's books, Jane Fiore, invited Jill to bring her portfolio. She said, Jill had a portfolio of lots and lots of pictures of mice and the structure of a mouse world. Her craftsmanship was extraordinary. You only had to open the portfolio to know she was something special. But there wasn't a story. Instead, there was the idea of the community of mice. But Jane Fiore saw the potential in Jill Barklem's work, and so she offered her a 4-book publishing deal. That's how you know it was the 70s, because even if you had Jill Barklem quality work nowadays, I don't think you're getting a 4-book deal. So Jill Barklem got to work on her 4 books. It took Jill around 2 years to produce a book, with one large illustration taking up to 3 months. She would do lots of studies and sketches and preliminary artwork. In the end, she decided that the theme of her 4 books would be a year in Brambly Hedge, and each book would represent one of the 4 seasons. So Spring Story, Summer Story, Autumn Story, and Winter Story were published in the autumn of 1980. Spring Story follows a little boy mouse named Wilfred, and today is Wilfred's birthday. Wilfred lives with his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Toadflax, and his siblings. For his birthday, he receives some gifts from his parents, including a new whistle. Meanwhile, next door at the Crabapple Cottage, Mr. and Mrs. Apple are getting up for breakfast, and they can hear Wilfred's annoying whistle through the windows. We get an illustration of Crabapple Cottage, which is a cross-section of the house showing all of the rooms. All of the mice live in tree houses, not tree houses as in scaffolding around a tree like a human tree house, but tree houses as in hollowed out inside of tree. These cross-section illustrations are sort of a cornerstone of Jill Barklem's work. Mr. Apple is the warden of the store stump, where all of the food in Brambly Hedge is kept. So Mr. Apple goes to work, and Wilfred is playing outside, and so Mr. Apple invites Wilfred to come in and do the store stump duties with him. And they check all the rooms and check the inventory or whatever. Later, Mr. Apple visits his daughter Daisy. Daisy is married to Lord Woodmouse, so they are Lord and Lady Woodmouse. They live in the Old Oak Palace. Also in this scene is Mrs. Crustybread, the palace cook, mentioned only because her name is Mrs. Crustybread. Mr. Apple tells them his idea, which is that he wants to host a surprise picnic for Wilfred's birthday, and everyone is on board. So then we have to go around inviting people to this picnic. We meet Basil, who runs the store stump cellars, and we update Mr. Toadflax, hey, we're gonna throw a picnic for your son, and he seems into the idea. There's a lot of different mice mentioned in passing, but suffice it to say, they're all excited. Mrs. Crustybread makes a cake for the party, and this kitchen looks awesome. And then everyone meets at the palace, and they're gonna walk together to the picnic location. Wilfred is kind of bummed, because no one seems to know it's his birthday. And then they have to go on a very long walk to whatever this picnic location is. And Wilfred is pushing a heavy basket in a wheelbarrow. They start setting up the picnic, and Wilfred is told to open the basket that he's been pushing this whole time. And it turns out that the basket he's been pushing is his birthday cake. He gets to open presents, and then all the kids play while the parents nap in the bluebells. In Summer Story, it's a very hot summer, and so a lot of the mice are hanging out by the stream. Then we learn about the flour mill and the dairy mill. The dairy mill is run by Poppy Eyebright, and she uses milk kindly given by some friendly cows. I don't exactly know how the logistics of that would work, but we're going with it. And Poppy doesn't like that it's so hot because she has to keep the butter from melting. Meanwhile, at the flour mill, we meet Dusty Dogwood. Dogwood is his family name, but he's called Dusty because he's always covered in a layer of flour. Poppy and Dusty keep going out to the stream more and more, ... And then by June, they were engaged. I appreciate the passage of time. Though I do wonder, because we say it's a hot summer, and then we say that they're engaged in June. So, like, how long were they courting before they got engaged? Even if we're saying it started being a hot summer in, like, April, that's only, like, like 3 months, maybe? I had to count. Or maybe it's a whole year, so maybe they started courting in, like, July or August, and now it's June of the next year. That's possible. In any case, they're going to have a midsummer wedding, and they're going to have their wedding in a raft on the water. And in the days leading up to the wedding, Poppy is embroidering her wedding dress. Then on the day of the wedding, we have to prepare food. Basil preps the wine, and we see Poppy in her wedding dress. And that was sort of the first realization I had as a kid that, like, a wedding dress could look like anything. Because as a kid, I was like, oh my god, there's, like, pink in this wedding dress. Which was very exciting for me to contemplate. Then Dusty goes to check something in the flour mill, and of course gets flour all over his wedding suit. His friend Conker tries to dust him off, but it is ineffective. I think it's fine. I mean, she knew he was Dusty when she got engaged to him. It's not going to be like a surprise that he's Dusty on their wedding day. Then we have our wedding procession, and we have our ceremony on the raft. It's like a big raft. I feel like I'm saying raft, and you might be thinking like a dinghy, but I mean like a flat, rustic party boat. The old vole is the officiant for the wedding. Then after the ceremony, we do a bunch of dancing, and the ropes tying the raft to the shore wear out. So then the raft starts to float down the stream. Eventually it gets caught in the plants, and they party some more. Then everyone starts to go home at dusk. And Poppy and Dusty stay in a honeymoon cottage. In Autumn's story, Lord Woodmouse and his daughter Primrose are going blackberry picking. I am dressed like Primrose for you today. But then, old Mrs. Eyebright says that bad weather is coming. So they have to finish harvesting before the bad weather comes, and so Primrose is sent home. Then Lord and Lady Woodmouse go to help, I think, harvest mushrooms. Some sort of whimsical chore. But then the mice realize that Primrose is missing. She didn't make it home. And we start looking everywhere for her. We're looking in cupboards, we're asking different mice if they've seen her, but we cannot find her. Meanwhile, Primrose had been wandering home, because, you know, she's a child, and she sees a little house up in the stalks of corn. So she climbs up to the house and discovers that there's 2 old field mice living in it, and she has tea with them. I was obsessed with this illustration. I love it so much. I think because I love miniatures, and I also like real-life tiny houses. So this illustration is like the best of both worlds. It's like this magical, tiny, spherical house. Then Primrose climbs back down, and she finds a tunnel. And the tunnel leads into some kind of mysterious house. It's this maze of dark tunnels. Though in the cross-section illustration that Jill Barklem did, it does not look dark. I think it loses a little bit of that spookiness. Primrose is freaked out, running through these corridors, trying to find a way out. And eventually she does make it outside, but at this point the bad weather is rolling in. So it is dark, it is scary, and it is rainy, and she doesn't know where she is. Then she sees 5 shadowy figures, and she's very freaked out, so she hides from them. And convinces herself that she's going to peek out and look at the last figure and see what it is. And so she peeks out, and the last figure is Mr. Apple. It is the searched party trying to find her. So she jumps out and is reunited with them, and then she is taken home to bed. In Winter Story, it is a dark and cold winter. Mr. Apple is coming home from his job at the store stump, and then it starts snowing. And next door, the Toadflax children are very excited because they've never seen snow like this before. The next day, the hedge is covered in snow. Enough snow for a snowball. Everyone tunnels out of their houses and rendezvous at the store stump. And there we get the announcement of the snowball. Tonight at the ice hall. Which means that we have to build the ice hall. So the mice very efficiently hollow out this snowdrift to start to build this ballroom. And we also cook all of the food for the ball. So by that evening, there is a beautiful ice hall, built with an extremely fast turnaround time. If only contractors were like that. Am I right, fellow adults? The mice do some dancing, and they eat supper, and then the children are put to bed, and the adults come and party some more. They party until dawn, and then they drag themselves into bed, and it starts to snow again, but everyone is fast asleep. So those are the first 4 books. After the first 4 books were published, Jill Barklem had a baby, and she started working on the next book. And it was harder for Jill to work on this new book now that she had a baby. She wanted to spend as much time as possible with her new baby, and yet she also wanted to get back to Brambly Hedge. Was it going to be possible to give both areas of her life the attention they required? She felt guilty towards her family when she worked. She felt a sense of obligation to her publisher when she didn't. She was also concerned whether readers would like this new book. But The Secret Staircase was published in 1983, and readers did like it. But I was not one of the readers. I only grew up with the first 4 Brambly Hedge books. So the later ones were a revelation to me working on this video. In The Secret Staircase, it is midwinter, and the mice are bringing decorations to the palace for a celebration. Primrose and Wilfred are going to recite a poem. So they need costumes to wear, and they need to practice. They start to practice, but there's too much hustle and bustle, so they're a little bit too distracted. So they go ask Lady Woodmouse what they should do. And Lady Woodmouse says that they should go try the attic, that there might be clothes they can wear as a costume, and that it'll be quiet because no one is going up there to do anything. Wilfred and Primrose go to the attic, but they are very distracted by all the cool stuff up there. It's like when you try and clean your room and get distracted playing with your Nintendo DS. Primrose finds an old key, and Wilfred finds a locked door behind a curtain. And of course, this old key unlocks this locked door, and it opens to the bottom of a winding staircase. They climb up this staircase, and in the illustration, it looks so tall. An attic is already at the top of a building, and this staircase is so tall on top of the top of this building. But they eventually find this fancy room. To me, it almost looks like a throne room, and they realize that this area is a whole suite of rooms. They look around, they find some cool old clothes that they can wear as costumes, and they do finally practice the poem. Eventually they realize it's getting late, so they go back down to the party, and they don't have time to change, so they just put cloaks over the costumes. The ceremony for midwinter is bringing in a big log to burn, which feels a little bit ill-advised considering they live in hollowed out trees. But they burn the log and then they have a big party. Finally, it's time for Wilfred and Primrose to give their poem, and they dramatically reveal their costumes and everyone is in awe. The next book is The High Hills, published in 1986. The setting is inspired by the Central Lake District. We open with Wilfred hanging out with the weavers, and the weavers are making blankets for the voles in the high hills. They don't want Wilfred getting in the way, so they tell him to read a book, and he finds a book called The Daring Explorers of Old Hedge Days, which follows Sir Hogweed Horehound and his search for gold. The weavers complain that they are out of the exact yellow dye that they need. It was made out of Grandpa Blackthorn's lichen, and they don't have any more of it. After reading this book about Hogweed Horehound, Wilfred is very excited to go on an adventure, so he convinces everyone to let him come to the high hills. He packs a big bag of gear, so he'll be ready for anything. The next day, 2 weavers, Wilfred and Mr. Apple, start hiking. They make it to the vole's house, give them the blankets, and spend the night. The next day, Wilfred and Mr. Apple go home separately. The two weavers go home ahead of them because Wilfred wants to explore. Wilfred climbs up a rock face because he thinks he sees gold. It is, of course, not gold, it's just some kind of dust. But then he is too scared to climb back down. I did that once with a jungle gym as a kid. I climbed up onto the top of it, and then was too scared to climb back down, and I was like, oh my god, they're gonna have to call the fire department to get me down. But I eventually made it down. Mr. Apple climbs up to Wilfred, so now they're gonna take a different way down together. And they're on this very narrow ledge, and so Wilfred uses some rope from his pack to tie them together. That night they make camp in a cave, and in Wilfred's pack he has fire starters, so they're able to start a fire and cook some food. And also Mr. Apple's leg hurts. It's mentioned in, I think, multiple books that he walks with a limp because of a previous injury, but Wilfred has some ointment and a first aid kit. They spend the night in this camp, and then the next day they climb down to a stream. But Mr. Apple isn't feeling too good. He can't walk any farther. So Wilfred makes a raft. He, ties a bunch of sticks together or something. At this point, you kind of lost me, because how old is this child, I don't think he's in Mouse Boy Scouts learning survival techniques. How is he making a raft? But they use this very impressive raft to sail down the stream, and at some point Wilfred's hat flies off. Meanwhile, there is a search party of other mice, and they see Wilfred's hat, so they know he must be close by. And then the raft starts sailing past them. So they throw a rope to them and they're able to pull them in. Wilfred explains that the whole thing is his fault because he wanted to go exploring. And then Primrose, who has her priorities in check, is like, well, did you find gold? And Wilfred's like, no, I only found this dust. And it turns out the dust is Grandpa Blackthorn's lichen. And the story ends with everyone going to bed. I feel like a lot of them end that way. I wonder if it's because you're supposed to read these to your kids. It makes it a good bedtime story to have the characters also go to sleep. The next book is Sea Story. Apparently, Jill Barklem's husband David suggested that they get a family boat and moor it in Ipswich near Suffolk. I'm sure I pronounced those perfectly. And Jill Barklem was not excited about this. She was scared of the boat. So to combat this, she learned everything she could about boats. And as a consequence of that, she got very interested in the sea and wanted to write a story about the mice going to sea. So in 1990, we get Sea Story. Dusty, Poppy, Primrose, and Wilfred are going to go on a boat journey to the ocean. They are going to meet with the sea mice to pick up some salt. Apparently, usually the sea mice bring them salt, but they ran out of salt early, so now they have to go down to the sea mice and pick up the salt. They sail the boat for a while. We get a great boat cross section. They stop for the night and eat dinner, and then they get back to sailing the next day. But Wilfred is kind of bored and messing around, so he knocks into the steering tiller. Didn't know what a tiller was, had to look it up. I got it through context, but I wanted to know if I was missing something. Seemingly it's just a steering wheel, but it's a lever. And so they are knocked off course and they hit the riverbank and get stuck. Thankfully, the water level rises during the night, getting them unstuck. Later, they ask some water shrews for directions, and the shrews tell them to dock and start walking. They walk for a while, and then they see the ocean. Then they meet the sea mice, Purslane, his wife Thrift, and their kids, Pebble, Shell, and Shrimp. I feel like the hedge mice have slightly more normal names. I know we're trying to do thematic, ocean-themed names, but they're not even really names. But the hedge mice and the whimsically named sea mice have supper together and they compare where they live. Over the next few days, they play on the beach a lot. Then the rain comes in, so they have to cover up the salt trays. They play inside for a little while, but the next day it's time to leave. They exchanged various gifts, but my favorite was that the sea mouse children give Primrose and Wilfred a shell so that they could hold it up to their ears and hear the ocean. The last book is Poppy's Babies, published in 1994. Dusty and Poppy now have 3 babies, and they live together in the flour mill, which is not a great place to raise a family. The clatter of the machinery makes it hard for the babies to sleep, and it is 92 steps up to the kitchen. So suffice it to say, Poppy is kind of struggling. Lady Woodmouse and Primrose come to visit, and we learn that Poppy's baby's naming ceremony is in 2 days. Later, Dusty takes some flour to the store stump, and Mr. Apple and Wilfred are there, and Dusty explains to them that Poppy is kind of struggling. So Mr. Apple takes him to a cottage that is next door to the store stump. It is empty because it used to be Mr. Apple's aunt's cottage. And Mr. Apple is like, let's clean up this cottage and you can give it as a present to Poppy, which is sweet. It's very convenient that we had this empty house lying around. But all of the mice are going to work together to clean up this house in time for naming day. And it's going to be a surprise, so we have to keep it a secret from Poppy. Lady Woodmouse is tasked with distracting Poppy. So the two of them work on sewing together, and Lady Woodmouse invites her to come stay at the palace for the night. This is the night before the naming day. So we need Poppy out of the mill so that we can move all of the stuff into the new house. But it's presented to Poppy like it'll be nice to stay in the palace the night before naming day. Poppy agrees and packs up all the baby's stuff to take it to the palace. And the babies seem excited by the whole thing. And that night, Lady Woodmouse and Poppy work some more on their sewing. The next day is the naming day ceremony. It seems basically like a baptism. The old vole sprinkles water on the babies. And then it starts to rain. So all the mice run to take cover and they run into the house that they just flipped for Poppy. And Poppy's like, wow, this house is really nice. I've never been in here before. And the mice take her up to the nursery and Poppy realizes that this house is for them. Then they have a little party, they have some cake, and they put the babies to bed. Now this book is unfortunately the last of the Brambly Hedge books that Jill Barklem worked on. While she was working on Poppy's babies, she started having vision problems. She was having trouble focusing, and by the time she reached the last illustrations, she was only able to see half the page she was working on. The rest had simply disappeared. Doctors did a variety of tests, and it turned out that Jill would need an operation to relieve pressure from the optic nerve. This operation was a success, and her vision returned to normal, but she suffered some more medical problems, so she decided she would take a break from working on the books. But conveniently, at that time, she started working on an animated series.
Welcome to the magical world of Bramley Hedge, where you can enjoy 4 seasonal adventures featuring the lovable mice.
The production company, Hit Entertainment, approached HarperCollins about doing animation of the first 4 Brambly Hedge books. We've talked about Hit Entertainment on the channel before. They did Angelina Ballerina and Kipper the Dog, which I've made videos on. Doing an animated adaptation of Brambly Hedge had come up before, but this was the first time that Jill Barklem thought the team saw her vision. It was decided that the series would be done in stop-motion animation, animated by the studio Cosgrove Hall. Producer Jackie Cockle and art director Bridget Appleby pitched their ideas to Jill Barklem. They were going to use Jill Barklem's illustrations as backgrounds, but using decoupage to make them like 3D, so they weren't just like flat matte paintings. Bridget Appleby said, "I decided to make the sets look a bit like a giant pop-up book. I'm glad I didn't know at the start the number of sets that would be needed. It turned out to be 57. The process of the animation started out with treatments. They had to write a way to extend the original stories to fit 30 minutes. Then they would write a script, then they would record the voice acting, then the animation team would make storyboards planning out all the different shots. Meanwhile, the model makers were making the mice. The mice were each about 9 inches high, were first sculpted in clay, and then molds were taken and rubber latex skins cast. They didn't want to use fake fur because they didn't want them to look like stuffed animals and they didn't want them getting damaged. The clothing was hand-painted onto white material with watercolors to give it the same soft look as the illustrations. Then the music was composed by Ernie Wood. He did an instrumental theme tune that reminds me a little bit of Angelina Ballerina. Then, Teresa Plummer Andrews bought the series for the BBC. The first episode, Winter Story, premiered on the BBC at 4:15 p.m. on Christmas Day 1996. Over 7 million people tuned in. After the first 4 episodes, they ended up adapting the second 4 books as well. I had never seen these before. I didn't know they existed. And I think they're pretty cute. As I mentioned, they did add stuff to the scripts to sort of fill time. So, for example, in the Winter Story episode, Basil, Wilfred, and Primrose get stuck in the snow as they're like tunneling out the ice hall for the snowball. And they create a little tunnel so Primrose can run out and ask for help. So it's stuff like that, adding in slightly more plot. Since they've added stuff, it's not a one-to-one recreation of the books, but it's obviously very faithful. I will say sometimes the movements of the mice felt a little bit uncanny valley. I think maybe it was like too smooth or something. I don't know. It looked a little odd. Stop motion experts weigh in on what I'm reacting to. Then, over the years, there have been roughly 1,000 Brambly Hedge collectibles. There is a sewing pattern book, so you can make your own little mice. That reminded me of how American Girl doll used to have sewing patterns so you could sew the clothes for the American Girl dolls. Then the China company Royal Doulton did a ton of Brambly Hedge stuff. They did plates and tea sets and even figurines. And I have Primrose. Oh, she's like super blown out. Oh no. Okay, is the camera focusing on her? The thing about China collectibles is they make me very nervous because they're very breakable. I have a ton of dolls, but those girls are just made of plastic. Like, they're fine. With Miss Primrose here, when the next big earthquake comes, she's toast. Then the brand Border Fine Arts did figures. Hantel Victorian Miniatures also did figures, and these ones seem to be, like, posable, which is kind of a funny concept to me. There was tons of stationery and school supplies, and a brand called Golden Bear did stuffed animals. They made so much stuff that it's actually kind of hard for me to find all of it. It's not really archived anywhere, so I was dependent on stuff that had at one point been sold on eBay or stuff that the Brambly Hedge Facebook page had posted. But please tell me about any weird Brambly Hedge collectibles you had. And I don't know where else to mention this, but there was a photo on the Brambly Hedge Facebook page of Princess Diana at some sort of Brambly Hedge event. I have many questions about this picture, none of which are answered by the caption. I'm going to assume that this was either a book launch event or a product launch event, and I'm going to assume that at this point she had kids. Then in the 2000s, we get 2 more Brambly Hedge books not by Jill Barklem. These are branded Stories from Brambly Hedge, and they are written by Alan MacDonald and illustrated by Lizzie Sanders. There's only 2 of them. The first one is Wilfred to the Rescue in 2005. The plot is that there is flooding in Brambly Hedge, so a family of voles has to come stay with the mice. The kids are all playing hide and seek together, and then the vole girl floats away, and Wilfred has to do an emergency vole rescue. The other book is Primrose in Charge in 2006. In that one, Primrose and Wilfred have to help babysit Poppy's babies. I don't know why these books exist. I'm going to guess that the publisher just wanted to capitalize more on the Brambly Hedge brand. But it's kind of weird, right? And it doesn't feel like Brambly Hedge at all, because it doesn't look like Brambly Hedge. I can see why they only ended up doing 2 of these. Another random thing I love is that over the years there have been multiple Brambly Hedge nature trails. I believe the first one is the Brambly Hedge Trail at Essex Wildlife Trust, Aberton Reservoir. Bit of a mouthful. This trail has carved wooden statues of all of the different characters. And so you can walk around this park and see all of your favorite Brambly Hedge characters. Some of the statues look a little silly, but that's okay. And then another unexplained photo from the Facebook page. Here's David Attenborough with the Wilfred statue. I'm assuming he was there for like the opening of the trail, right? That makes sense. I don't think he was there posing for a photo on a random Tuesday. Then there have been multiple recent trails at Abbotsbury Swanery. Swanery is in like a place for swans. These trails have trail marker art and props. As for right now, sadly, Jill Barklem's health continued to decline, and in 2017, she passed away peacefully at only 66 years old. In 2018, there was a ceremony to dedicate a hedge to Jill Barklem's memory, and Judi Dench did the ribbon cutting at that event. This video is really a who's who of older British celebrities. The Brambly Hedge brand is now managed by Jill Barklem's kids, Lizzie and Pete, and the brand now produces all kinds of very awesome merch. They make puzzles, they make coloring books, they make cards, they make stationery, they make tea towels, they make mugs. And in September of 2025, they are going to republish the book A Visit to Brambly Hedge. This book includes a bunch of recipes that Jill Barklem wrote, character bios, sketches. It seems like a very cool book that would have been very helpful for the research of this video. And I tried to see if I can get an original copy, but no one seems to be selling it. So it's a good thing they're republishing it. And I'm waiting with bated breath. I hope you liked hearing about Brambly Hedge. I think it's such a cool brand. Jill Barklem seems like such an interesting person, and I'm so happy that it's still alive and well today. Hopefully my video can expose the brand to some more Americans. If you enjoyed this video, you can subscribe. I'm Sarah Seraph on Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, and TikTok. I'm trying to be more of an influencer, so come see how that's going. And as always, all of the sources that I used will be linked in a Google Doc in the description. And I don't know how to end a YouTube video. So, bye! All these flowers are just taped on this hat. Movie magic.